All right, let's dive right into one of the absolute most fascinating phenomena in modern cinema. Welcome to This Explainer, where today we are unpacking the unbelievable and honestly highly improbable journey of the 2019 film Joker. When this project was first announced, a lot of people were scratching their heads wondering, do we really need yet another interpretation of this iconic comic book villain? But director Todd Phillips and star Joaquin Phoenix delivered something that didn't just shock the box office, it literally spilled out onto the streets across the globe. The story behind a camera is every bit as gripping as what we saw on screen, so let's get into it. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover Section 1, an unlikely origin story. Section 2, becoming the Joker. 3, crafting a decaying Gotham. 4, the outrage and security concerns. 5, its billion-dollar success. And finally, Section 6, its incredibly complex cultural legacy. Kicking things right off with Section 1, an unlikely origin story, or pitching the anti-blockbuster. So picture the landscape back in 2016. The gold standard for comic book movies was firmly set by the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Extended Universe. We're talking massive shared universes, extremely loud, explosive action sequences, and a really heavy reliance on CGI. That was the formula. That's what the studios wanted. But then you have Todd Phillips, a director mostly known for wild comedies like The Hangover, pitching something radically different to Warner Brothers. He wanted a standalone, grounded character study with absolutely zero CGI hoopla. He actually proposed an entirely new label to differentiate these films from Marvel, focusing on low-budget, gritty movies inspired by 1970s character studies like Taxi Driver. Now, as you can imagine, this was a massive swing, and getting the studio on board was a serious uphill battle. To really understand just how hesitant the studio was, consider this number. They greenlit the film, sure, but they gave it a surprisingly low budget of somewhere between $55 and $70 million. Now, to put that into perspective for you, the previous villain-centered DC movie, Suicide Squad, cost $175 million. Actually, reports indicate the studio purposefully kept the budget small to try and gently dissuade Phillips from even making it. But Phillips and his team kind of flipped the script on them. They took that constraint and used it to completely fuel their creative fire. Moving on to Section 2, becoming the Joker, and Joaquin Phoenix's transformation. Now, Joaquin Phoenix wasn't an easy get. He was initially pretty hesitant to take on a comic book role, mostly because he'd previously turned down Marvel roles to avoid being tied down to a long, multi-picture deal. But the idea of a one-off, standalone character study, that hooked him. And once he committed, his preparation was just extreme. He lost a staggering 52 pounds over 8 months on a highly sparse diet. This made his character Arthur Fleck look truly wolf-like, deeply malnourished and physically isolated from the world. Mentally, he dug just as deep. He extensively studied videos of people suffering from pathological laughter to perfect that really painful, uncontrollable laugh we hear in the film. And he even read books on political assassinations to try to understand the very real motivations of killers. Director Todd Phillips really framed the character's psychology perfectly with this thought. He noted his normal face is his real mask. Think about what that actually means for Arthur Fleck's mindset for a second. Throughout the entire film, society demands that Arthur put on a happy face, that he act completely normal despite suffering from severe mental illness. Phillips structured the story so that Arthur's everyday civilian identity is the actual disguise. The Joker persona, as chaotic and terribly violent as it ultimately is framed as Arthur's true self, finally breaking free from all those suffocating societal expectations. Which brings us to Section 3, crafting a decaying Gotham and building a 1980s nightmare. So a big question for the filmmakers was, how exactly do you make Gotham City feel oppressive without leaning on those massive, sprawling CGI establishing shots? They had to find a way to visually represent Arthur's total isolation and the complete decay of the society around him, all while staying on that tight budget we talked about earlier. Production designer Mark Friedberg and cinematographer Lawrence Sher absolutely nailed this. First off, they shot in Newark and New York, and they deliberately filled the sets with 1970s muscle cars while literally piling garbage onto the streets. It created this immediate sense of dissonance and deep urban decay. Secondly, they heavily utilized sodium vapor lamps for lighting. This very specific lighting choice perfectly highlighted Arthur's isolation while giving the entire city this sickly, almost infected yellow hue. And third, rather than building grand, sweeping, futuristic towers, the VFX team actually went the other way. They digitally squeezed the skyline down, making it feel like the heavy concrete of the city was physically pressing down on Arthur's shoulders. Let's pivot to Section 4, outrage and security concerns, or the pre-release panic. As that October release date approached, the public anxiety absolutely skyrocketed. On September 18th, the U.S. Army went as far as issuing an internal memo warning service members of potential violence at theaters, specifically noting the Joker character's popularity among the incel community online. By late September, the media was intensely probing the film's potential to inspire real-world violence. Families of victims from the tragic 2012 Aurora movie theater shooting even signed a letter of concern directing to Warner Brothers. By the time October rolled around, the NYPD and LAPD were officially increasing police presence and even using undercover tactics at local theaters. The tension in the air was just palpable. But despite all of that unprecedented pre-release panic, reality ended up looking entirely different. The FBI and Homeland Security found no credible threats, and the theatrical run proceeded completely peacefully. There were literally zero reports of violent incidents occurring at any of the screenings. The film played out entirely without the violence the media had feared, which allowed audiences to just sit back and watch the movie for what it was, a piece of cinema. On to Section 5, a billion-dollar success and breaking box office records. The financial success of Joker was absolute. It pulled in a staggering $1.079 billion globally. That made it the very first R-rated film in cinematic history to cross the billion-dollar mark. No way anyone saw that coming. And when you factor in that incredibly modest $55 to $70 million budget we discussed earlier, the budget-to-gross ratio made it the most profitable film based on a comic book ever made at that time. Warner Brothers' huge gamble on a gritty, dark character study paid off in a way literally no one in the industry could have predicted. And, the success wasn't just commercial. It was critically monumental. It all started when it won the highly prestigious Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, which was just an unheard-of achievement for a comic book movie. It then went on to rake in 11 Academy Award nominations, breaking the previous comic book movie record held by The Dark Knight. Joaquin Phoenix rightfully took home the Oscar for Best Actor, and composer Hildur Guðnadóttir won for Best Original Score, making her the first woman to ever win as a solo composer in that specific category. It completely firmly cemented Joker as true prestige cinema. And finally, Section 6, a complex cultural legacy, from cinema to the streets. Here is where things get truly fascinating. The intense imagery of Joker didn't just stay confined to the movie theater. Almost completely organically, it became a symbol of resistance globally. In Lebanon, local artists painted murals of the Joker holding a Molotov cocktail. Over in Chile, the movie's haunting phrase, "We are all clowns," was graffitied onto statues during massive social protests. In Hong Kong, protesters famously wore Joker masks to outright defy an emergency decree that banned face coverings. And in France, firefighters even donned Joker makeup during the Yellow Vest protests. The character literally leaped off the screen and became a tangible, real-world symbol for those expressing deep anti-government sentiments. Now, analysts point out that a big reason for this resonance is that Joker is fundamentally a stark condemnation of austerity. Just to clarify, austerity refers to the difficult economic conditions created when governments drastically reduce public spending. In the film, Arthur literally loses access to his crucial medication because his social services are cut due to citywide austerity measures. This incredibly bleak portrayal of a broken system, completely abandoning its most vulnerable citizens, resonated deeply with disenfranchised people in the real world. It was that shared feeling of being left behind that fueled the adoption of the film's imagery and protests all around the globe. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative question to think about. Where exactly does cinematic villainy end and real-world political symbology begin? I mean, Joker started as a rough pitch for a low-budget, standalone comic book origin story. It evolved into an Oscar-winning, billion-dollar juggernaut and somehow ended up as the face of global political protests. It blurred the lines between pure entertainment and harsh reality in a way very, very few films ever have. I hope this explainer gave you a totally new lens through which to view this incredible piece of cinema. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep asking those big questions.